Braxen Kettler had a creed he lived by. Having things in abundance was never for hoarding, it was for giving. And Braxen Kettler had abundance. Neighbors whispered he had more land than a man could ride across in a day, more cattle than he could brand in a season. But he wasn't known for his wealth. He was known for how he used it. A sack of flour on a widow's doorstep, a new saddle for a ranch hand who couldn't afford one. For Braxen, abundance was a calling. But for every man with everything, there's someone with nothing. Zenya Lia had nothing. She had a patched dress, 2 hungry children, and a name dragged through the dust of every saloon in the county. Yet she walked with the dignity of a queen, a woman who refused to kneel. That morning, she walked farther than she cared to count until she reached the iron gate of the Kettler Ranch. Nailed to the weathered wood was a sign. A hand-painted sign that stopped her dead in her tracks. "If I light your path, don't turn around and smoke me out." The words hit her harder than the prairie wind. Her heart caught in her throat. How many times had she lit a path for a man, only to have him leave her in darkness? This was the place. She knew it. She squared her shoulders and stepped through the gate, carrying nothing but courage, her children's future, and a sliver of faith that just maybe abundance was about to meet need. The walls of her cabin were so thin the wind sang through them. Cracks Jubal Stroud had promised to fix 2 springs ago, and still the wind found its way in. Zena pressed a hand to her belly, 6 months along, feeling the child stir. She saw the disgust in her husband's eyes every time he looked at her. "Another mouth to feed," Jubal had muttered that morning, spitting tobacco juice near the door. "As if we ain't got enough troubles with the boy." Their son Timothy, only 4, clung to her skirts as his father stomped and kicked at the furniture. Jubal hadn't worked in 3 months, not since the mine closed. Other men found work. Jubal found whiskey. "Maybe if you'd kept your legs closed, we wouldn't be in this mess," he snarled one night, his breath sour with liquor. Zena said nothing. Silence was safer. She just kept mending Timothy's shirt, her needle a tiny silver fish swimming through worn fabric. But Jubal was never finished. "Folks in town are talking," he sneered, his voice turning cruel, "saying how quick this one came along after the last, saying maybe I ain't the only man warming your bed." The needle slipped. A single drop of red bloomed on the shirt. "Jubal, please," she whispered. "Timothy can hear you." "Let him hear," he roared, his chair crashing backward. "Let him know what kind of woman his mama really is." Timothy started to cry. This wasn't the man she'd married. This was a stranger wearing his face. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Zena walked to town for flour, Timothy's small hand tight in hers. The weight of the baby made every step a chore. When they returned, Jubal was waiting. His bags were packed. "I'm done," he said, his eyes fixed on the far wall. "Heading to California. Heard there's still gold." The world tilted. "Jubal, what about the baby? What about Timothy?" He finally looked at her. His eyes were chips of ice. "What about them? That baby ain't mine. The timing don't add up. You were sneaking around." "That's not true," she whispered. "Do I know that?" He grabbed his hat. "All I know is I ain't staying to raise another man's child. And I ain't taking the boy neither. Can't be sure he's mine, come to think of it." The cruelty was a physical blow. She stumbled back, hand flying to her belly. "Jubal, please! They're your children." He was already at the door. "Tell whoever asks that Jubal Stroud don't claim no bastards. You want to survive? Figure it out yourself." And then he was gone. Timothy cried for his papa for 3 days. When he finally stopped asking, Zena packed their few things and walked to her mother's house. Branwen Crowwoot opened the door, her face a roadmap of worry. She asked no questions. She just opened her arms. "Come in, darling girl," she murmured. "Come home." Across the valley, Braxen Kettler watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. At 38, He had everything a man was supposed to want: land, cattle, money. But a familiar ache of loneliness settled in his chest like a stone. The ranch was his life, built by his father's calloused hands. Braxen had taken over at 25 and tripled its size. He was known as a fair boss, a generous neighbor. He was also known as the man who couldn't keep a wife. The first was Iris, a banker's daughter. 2 years into their marriage, the doctor visit started, the hushed conversations, then the diagnosis. "The doctor says you're infertile," Iris had announced over dinner, her voice casual. "There's no point in us trying anymore." The words kicked the air from his lungs. No sons to teach, no daughters to raise. The silence that followed was a chasm. 6 months later, she was gone. She remarried a railroad man. 9 months after that, she had a son, the proof of Braxen's failure, for the whole county to see. His second attempt was even worse. A schoolteacher named Dexter Holloway. The wedding was set. The church was full. Braxen stood at the altar, waiting. She never came. An hour later, his best friend returned from her boarding house with a letter. It was read aloud, his friend's voice heavy with embarrassment. "Dear Mr. Kettler," it began, "I cannot, in good conscience, bind myself to a man who cannot provide me with the children I desire. I have accepted a position in Oregon." The humiliation was absolute, public. He walked out of that church with his head high, but inside, something had died. He vowed never to risk that kind of pain again. 2 years passed. Braxen threw himself into his work, but the house was empty, echoing with ghosts of dreams. When his housekeeper retired, he faced a problem. He needed someone reliable, someone safe. The notice he posted at the general store was specific. "Seeking married woman for housekeeping position." "Married woman," he stressed to the store owner. "I ain't interested in any complications." Everyone remembered the Holloway incident. A married woman would be focused on work, not on catching his eye. It was a shield against the town's calculating single women, and against his own broken heart. But married housekeepers were in short supply. 3 weeks passed. He was about to give up when his foreman, Sidon, knocked on his office door. "Boss, there's a woman here about the job." Sidon paused. "Maybe I should mention, it's that Lia woman, the one whose husband ran off." Braxen frowned. He'd heard the gossip. Jubal Stroud abandoning his pregnant wife, claiming the child wasn't his. "She married?" he asked. "Technically," Sidon shrugged. "Never heard of no divorce. That was good enough. Send her in." A moment later, Zenya Lia walked into his office, and Braxen felt something stir in his chest that he thought was long dead. She was beautiful, but not in a flashy way. It was a quiet beauty, like a wildflower growing in a crack in the rock. Her hair was pulled back, her dress was worn but clean. But her eyes held a strength that spoke of surviving storms. "Mr. Kettler," she said, her voice steady, "I'm here about the housekeeping position." He gestured to the chair. She sat with a careful grace, a woman trying to take up as little space as possible. He searched her face for the flaws gossip had assigned her. He saw only dignity and a bone-deep exhaustion. The interview was short. 3 questions. "Are you married?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have children?" 2. "A son who is 4 and a baby daughter." "Can you cook and clean?" "I've been keeping house since I was 12, Mr. Kettler. I'm not afraid of hard work." Her answers were perfect. He named a wage that was more than fair. He told her she could start Monday. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. As she walked to the door, he called after her, "Mrs. Lia." She turned, a flicker of hope in those storm-tossed eyes. "Welcome to the Kettler Ranch." Zena arrived at 7 sharp, the frost painting the grass silver. Her mother was watching the children, a blessing that made her throat tight. The ranch house was even grander up close. 2 stories of timber and stone, a palace compared to the shacks she'd known. Braxen was waiting in a kitchen larger than her entire cabin. "Mrs. Lia?" He nodded. "Right on time." He gave her a tour. His instructions were clear, detailed, but never condescending. He spoke to her as an equal. "The house is yours to manage," he finished. "I trust your judgment. As for meals," a hint of amusement touched his face. "I've been eating my own cooking for 2 years. Anything you make is an improvement." With that, he left her to it. Zenya worked with a fierce determination. She scrubbed, dusted, and polished, chasing away years of neglect. The house began to breathe again under her care. At noon, she had a simple soup and fresh bread ready when Braxen returned with 3 ranch hands. "Smells like heaven in here," one of them, a young man named Jake, said with a grin. "You're a lucky man, boss." Braxen's face darkened. "Mrs. Lia is here to work, Jake. Nothing more." The words were sharp. Zenya felt the weight of their speculation. She served the meal in silence. It was the same everywhere, people whispering, assuming the worst. Later, she was scrubbing the hallway floor on her hands and knees when Braxen found her. "There's a mop in the closet," he said quietly. "I know, sir, but some things need extra attention to come truly clean." He studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Lia, can I ask you something? Why did you answer my ad?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a moment. "Because you were honest about what you wanted. No false promises, just honest work for honest pay. That's rare." He nodded slowly. "Well, honesty works both ways. You do good work. Better than I expected." He turned to leave, then paused. "And, Mrs. Lia, call me Braxen. Sir makes me feel like my father." It was a small thing, but for the first time since Jubal left, someone was treating her like a person, not a cautionary tale. Weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Zenya managed the house with quiet efficiency. Braxen was courteous but distant, maintaining a professional wall between them. But he was thoughtful in ways that surprised her. He never forgot a cowboy's birthday. When the cook's wife had a difficult birth, Braxen covered the doctor's bill without being asked, and he included Zenya in these small kindnesses. One day, she found a small package on the kitchen counter. Her name was written in his careful script. Inside was a bar of lavender soap and a note. "For your hard work." She stared at it, her throat tight. When was the last time someone had simply appreciated her? The gifts became a monthly thing. A new pair of work gloves, a warm shawl for her walk home, practical, thoughtful things that showed he was paying attention. The town noticed, of course. "That Lia woman has certainly landed on her feet," she overheard one day at the general store. "Makes a person wonder what services she's really providing." The words burned. She held her head high and let them talk. Braxen seemed not to care about the gossip. He kept his distance, never giving anyone cause for speculation. It was exactly what she wanted. So why did it disappoint her? Why did she find herself listening for the sound of his boots on the floorboards? She pushed the thoughts away. Braxen Kettler was her employer, nothing more. But sometimes, polishing his desk, she wondered what it would be like to be cared for by a man like him, a man who saw her, really saw her. The thought was both a comfort and a terror. November arrived with a bitter wind. Zenya's routine was the one solid thing in her life. The steady wages meant Timothy had a new winter coat. Baby Sarah was thriving. She was settling into a life that felt dangerously close to content. Contentment, she had learned, was a fragile thing. It shattered on a gray Thursday afternoon. She was dusting the bookshelf in Braxen's office when a folded newspaper fell from behind a heavy book. It was from Billings, dated 2 weeks prior. One article was circled. "Local businessman strikes gold in California venture." Below the headline was a photograph that turned her blood to ice. Jubal Stroud. He stood grinning, his arm around a well-dressed woman dripping with jewelry. He looked prosperous, confident. He looked like a man who'd never had a bad day in his life. The article detailed his success. His new business partner, a Miss Violet Crawford, was also his fiancée. They planned to marry in the spring. The paper slipped from her fingers. He had found his gold. He had found a new life. All while his son cried himself to sleep, and his daughter learned to walk without a father. The injustice was a physical blow. He had left them with nothing but lies and shame, and now he was living like a king. The tears came in great, gasping sobs. She sank into the chair behind Braxen's desk and let the grief pour out. She was so lost in her misery she didn't hear the door open. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. "Mrs. Lia." She looked up into Braxen's concerned face. Humiliation washed over her, crying in her employer's office. "I'm sorry," she gasped, jumping up. I'll get back to work." But he didn't move. He picked up the newspaper. His expression grew dark as he read the headline. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. She could only nod. He set the paper aside. His next question confused her completely. "Mrs. Lia, when was the last time you took any time for yourself? Took a walk just for the pleasure of it?" "I don't see what that has to do with anything." "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. He held her coat for her. "The floors will still be here tomorrow." He led her out of the house, past the barns, to a path that wound through the grasslands toward the mountains. The setting sun painted the sky gold and pink. They walked in silence. The air was crisp, peaceful. Zenya felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. "I used to walk this path every evening," Braxen said finally. "Helped me think." He glanced at her. "What about you, Mrs. Lia? Do you still love anything?" The question was so personal, but something in his quiet honesty made her feel safe. "I love my children," she said. "I love my mother's hands when she braids my hair. I love the smell of bread baking." She hesitated. "But," he prompted gently, "but I don't love myself anymore. I don't know if I ever will again." They reached a small rise with a panoramic view of the valley. He stopped and turned to face her. "Mrs. Lia? Zenya? Can I tell you something?" She nodded, surprised he used her first name. "I've been watching you for 2 months. I've seen how you care for this house, for my men, how you mend clothes that should be rags. You're a good woman, a strong woman. What your husband did to you doesn't change that. His choices say everything about his character and nothing about yours." Fresh tears pricked her eyes. "You don't know the whole story." "I know enough," he said, his voice firm. "I know you didn't deserve to be abandoned. I know your children didn't deserve it. And I know that man in that photograph is a fool who threw away the most precious thing he'll ever have." The words hung in the dusk between them, more intimate than a touch. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that made her heart race. He was looking at her as if she mattered, as if she was beautiful. "Braxen," she whispered. The sound of his name seemed to break a dam inside him. He stepped closer, so close she could smell the leather and sage on his clothes. "Zenya," he said, and her name was a prayer. She knew she should step back, remember her place, but she couldn't move. When he reached up and gently touched her face, she didn't pull away. When he leaned down to kiss her, she rose to meet him. The kiss was gentle, tentative. But when she responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, he deepened it, and something inside her that had been frozen for years began to thaw. They walked back to the house in a daze, hands brushing. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. At the back door, Braxen started to speak. "Zenya, She stopped him with a look. "Not here, not yet." He understood. The walls had ears. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse, they found themselves alone in the kitchen. The silence stretched between them, tight as a wire. Zena, he finally said, his voice rough. What happened out there? Was the most beautiful thing that's happened to me in years, she finished softly. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. There was no hesitation now. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. I've wanted to do this since the first day you walked into my office, he murmured against her hair. God help me, Zena, but I think I'm falling in love with you. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they filled her with a warmth she'd thought was lost forever. He kissed her again, deeper this time, urgent. When they broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I know this is complicated, he said. You're still married, but I can't pretend anymore. I want you to stay, not just as my housekeeper, as whatever this is. I care about you and your children more than I care what the town thinks. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of, but fear was an old friend. And when you grow tired of us? When you remember the scandal attached to my name? His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears. Zenya Lia, you listen to me. I am 38 years old. I have been alone for most of my life, convinced I was broken. But you make me feel whole. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know I can't give you more children, but I can give you respect, security, and all the love I have in me. If you'll let me. The kitchen was warm and golden. The moment was peaceful, perfect. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Braxen, I want to stay. This time, his kiss was full of the passion of a man given a second chance. Her body came alive under his touch, forgetting every cruel word Jubal had ever spoken. He lifted her onto the kitchen counter, and in the golden lamplight, she discovered what it meant to be cherished, not just taken. Afterward, they lay tangled on the floor, wrapped in a quilt. Zena felt a warmth between her thighs, evidence of their passion spilled on the wooden boards she had scrubbed clean just hours before. Embarrassment flooded her. With Jubal, nothing like this had ever happened. I need to clean this up, she mumbled, trying to pull away. I made a mess. He held her tight, his eyes twinkling. Leave it. I can't. This is your kitchen. Our kitchen, he corrected gently. And if there's evidence of our happiness on the floor, well, that seems fitting. She couldn't help but smile. You're ridiculous. I'm happy, he said, kissing her temple. Happier than I've been in years. Don't you dare feel ashamed of something so beautiful. But she did. As soon as he let her go, she was up, grabbing the mop, her cheeks burning as she scrubbed away the evidence of her body's surrender. 3 days later, he found her in the laundry room. He closed the door behind him. Zena, we need to talk. Her heart sank. He'd come to his senses. I want you to move in here, he said. Properly. With the children. She almost dropped the shirt she was holding. Braxen, I can't. We're not married. The scandal. Then marry me. The words hung in the air. Simple, direct. She stared at him, speechless. I know you're still legally married to Jubal, he continued. We can start the divorce process, but in the meantime, I want you here. I want Timothy learning to be a cowboy and Sarah taking her first steps in a house where she's safe. I want to wake up next to you every morning. The town will be scandalized, she whispered. Let them be, he said, his voice fierce. I've spent my life avoiding their gossip, and all it's gotten me is lonely. I don't care what they say anymore, Zena. I only care what you say. She looked into his eyes and saw her future. Ask me again, she said softly. He dropped to one knee, right there on the laundry room floor. Zenya Lia, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me be a father to your children? Yes, she sobbed. Yes, Braxen, I'll marry you. He stood and spun her around, dizzy with laughter. When he set her down, his face grew serious. There's something else, something you have to know. His voice was low. I can't give you more children, Zena. My first wife. She was right. I'm sterile. She silenced him with a kiss. When they parted, she cupped his cheek. Braxen Kettler, I have two beautiful children who need a father. What I need is love, and that, my darling man, you have in abundance. The relief in his eyes was so profound, it brought tears to her own. He had carried that shame for so long. I love you, he said, the words like a benediction. I love you too, she replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Moving to the ranch was easy. Timothy was thrilled. Baby Sarah immediately started exploring the big house, fearless and curious. She's going to be a handful, Zena warned as Braxen scooped the toddler onto his shoulders. Good, he laughed. This house has been too quiet for too long. The ranch was a haven. The town, however, was not. The scandal broke the first Sunday they attended church as a family. The whispers were like wasps buzzing around her head. Living in sin, she heard Mrs. Patterson mutter. And with those poor children watching. Braxen's hand found hers, a silent gesture of support. But after the service, as they walked to the wagon, she heard old Mr. Henley talking to a group of men. Mark my words, she'll break his heart just like the others did. Women like that are poison. Braxen stopped, his jaw clenched. Braxen, don't, she whispered. But he was already turning around, his face a mask of cold fury. Mr. Henley, was there something you wanted to say to me directly? The old man stammered. Now, Braxen, I didn't mean... Because if you have concerns about my personal life, Braxen's voice was dangerously quiet, I'd prefer you share them with me, rather than gossiping like an old woman. A hush fell over the crowd. That woman, Braxen continued, his eyes scanning the faces, is worth 10 of you. She has worked harder than any man I know, raised 2 children after being abandoned by a coward, and maintained her dignity despite the vicious gossip of small-minded people. If any of you have a problem with my choices, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere. But I will not stand here and listen to you insult the woman I intend to marry. The silence was deafening. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, some looking ashamed. As they drove home, Zena squeezed his arm. Thank you. You don't thank a man for defending his family, he said, and the word family made her heart swell. But their peace was about to be shattered. That very night, Kadon knocked on the door, his face grim. Boss, there's trouble coming. He took a deep breath. Jubil Stroud is back in town. The blood drained from Zena's face. What does he want? Braxen asked, his voice flat. Money, attention, Sidon said. But this time, he's talking about taking his children back, says he's got a legal claim. Zena sank into a chair. The life she'd just started to build was about to be torn down. Over my dead body, Braxen said, and the fury in his voice was terrifying. They planned for battle. He abandoned them, Braxen paced the parlor. He denied they were his. He has no legal right. But he's still legally their father. Zena's voice was hollow. And I'm still legally his wife. The law is on his side. Then we fight him with more than the law, Braxen vowed. We fight him with the truth. 3 days later, the confrontation came. Jubil Stroud swaggered into town on a fine horse, dressed in clothes that screamed California gold. He didn't come to the ranch. He made his stand on Main Street in front of the saloon for all the town to see. Jake, one of the ranch hands, rode back like the wind. He's at the saloon, boss, telling anyone who'll listen that he's come to collect what's his children, and his wife. Braxen's face was stone. This is our fight now, he said to Zena. Saddle 2 horses, he told Jake. Tell Sidon to gather the men. I want witnesses. The ride into town was the longest of Zena's life. Half the town was gathered on the street. Jubil stood on the saloon porch holding court. When he saw them, His smile turned predatory. "Well, well," he called out, "if it ain't my dear wife and her rich boyfriend." Zena dismounted, Braxen at her side. "Hello, Jubil." "I've come for my children," he announced to the crowd. "And my wife. Those children have been doing just fine without you." Braxen's voice cut through the murmurs. "But not without their father," Jubal shot back. "A man has rights, legal rights." "Even when he abandons them?" Zena found her voice. "Even when he claims they aren't his?" "I was young and foolish," Jubal declared. "I've grown up now. I can provide for them." "Where was this growth when your son cried himself to sleep asking for his papa?" Braxen demanded. "I'm here now," Jubal's voice hardened, "and I'm taking what's mine." Just then, a small voice cut through the tension. "Mama?" Everyone turned. Timothy stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes wide. He'd slipped away from the ranch. Jubal's face lit up in triumph. "Timothy, my boy, come to Papa." But Timothy didn't move. He looked from his mother to the stranger. "Who is that man, Mama?" he asked. The question hung in the air, the moment of truth. "I'm your papa, boy," Jubal said, his arms outstretched. "Don't you remember me?" Timothy studied him, then shook his head. "My papa has dark hair, and he's taller." His small finger pointed directly at Braxen. "Papa Braxen is my papa. You're just a man." The crowd stirred. Jubal's smile faltered. But it was about to get worse. Sarah, having also escaped, came toddling into the square. Jubal knelt down. "Sarah, baby girl, come see Papa." She looked at him with a blank stare. Then she pointed. "Who that man, Mama?" Nervous laughter rippled through the onlookers. Jubal's face flushed red. "She's just confused." But Sarah, oblivious, had made her own decision. She walked right up to him, patted his knee like she would a visiting uncle, and said solemnly, "Hello, Uncle." The crowd exploded into real laughter this time. "Uncle!" someone shouted. "Guess blood ain't as thick as they say." Jubal stood, burning with humiliation. "She doesn't understand." "She understands perfectly," Braxen said, scooping Sarah into his arms. She immediately cuddled against him, calling him Papa in her sweet voice. The truth was there for everyone to see. "You've poisoned them against me," Jubal roared at Zena. "I've never spoken ill of you," she replied calmly. "I've simply let them grow up with love." "I have legal rights," Jubal screamed, his composure shattering. "I'm their father. I'm her husband." "You forfeited those rights when you walked away." Braxen's voice was like a blade. "A real father doesn't abandon his children. A real husband doesn't spread lies about his wife." The town's most respected elder, Thomas Van Leer, pushed through the crowd. "Jubal Stroud," he said, his voice carrying authority. "I've watched these children grow up happy in Braxen's care. I know what makes a father, and it ain't blood alone. It's the one who stays, not the one who runs." The crowd murmured in agreement. Jubil was losing. He made one last desperate play. "Fine," he snarled. "Keep the brats, but she's still my wife." The ugly implication hung in the air. Braxen smiled, a smile with sharp edges. "Actually, you don't." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Divorce papers, filed 2 weeks ago. Grounds of abandonment and mental cruelty. All legal and proper." Jubal's face went white. "That's impossible. I never agreed." "Abandonment cases don't require the husband's consent," Van Leer said helpfully, "especially when there are witnesses to his public denial of his children." The fight drained out of Jubal. He looked around and saw only hostile faces. Defeated, he walked back to his horse, mounted up, and rode out of town. This time, for good. As the crowd dispersed, people came up to congratulate them. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had called her a sinner, even asked, "When's the wedding?" "Soon," Braxen replied, his arm tight around Zena's waist. Very soon. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning. Zena walked down the aisle in a simple, elegant dress, radiant with happiness. Timothy walked beside her, her proud escort. Sarah toddled behind, scattering flower petals. When the preacher asked if Braxen would take these children as his own, his voice rang with conviction. "I do, with all my heart." Timothy beamed. Sarah clapped her hands and yelled, "Papa!" and the whole church dissolved into joyful laughter. That evening, Zena stood on the porch of her new home, watching the stars. Braxen came up behind her, wrapping her in his arms. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Only one," she said, "that it took so long for us to find each other." He kissed the top of her head. "We found each other when we needed to." From inside, they could hear Timothy reading a story to Sarah. It was the sound of family, the sound of a future. Two broken people had found a way to make each other whole. They had proven that a family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who stays. Home wasn't just a place. Zena finally understood. It was wherever you were loved completely, flaws and all, and she was finally, truly, home. If you enjoyed this story of justice and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales you won't hear anywhere else.